Hey Reasonauts. Name isn't important, message is. Remember, every day is awesome. We just have to get through it. And before we begin, if these conversations have been helping you think differently or helping you feel a little less alone in what you carry, subscribe and stay with us each week. Share this with somebody who's been sitting quietly with truths they never fully knew how to explain. And if you want to continue the conversation, you can find us on Facebook too. Not for noise, not for attention, just to keep the signal moving forward for the people still trying to find clarity in the middle of all this. Thank you for being here, but just being you now. I want you to think about something. How many times have you seen something clearly, felt it completely, understood exactly what was happening, and still stayed quiet? Not because you were weak, not because you were blind, not because you had nothing to say, but because something inside you already understood. Truth changes rooms. And once certain truths are spoken, nothing ever fully returns to what it was before. There's a strange kind of pressure that comes with awareness, not just seeing clearly, but deciding what to do after you see. Because some truths are light, simple, a misunderstanding, a mistake, a forgotten detail. Those truths pass through life easily, but other truths arrive heavy because they carry consequence with them. You notice tension in a relationship before anybody admits it out loud. You recognize burnout hiding behind someone's smile. You hear resentment buried inside. I'm just tired. You watch someone slowly abandoning themselves while insisting everything is fine. And maybe the hardest part is this. Most of the time, you already know what's happening. Not perfectly, not arrogantly, not because you think you're smarter than everyone else. Your awareness simply connected the pattern before the words arrived. You noticed the emotional trajectory, the shift in energy, the repeated behavior, the silence between conversations, the growing distance, the contradiction nobody acknowledged yet. And once you see the pattern clearly, you can't fully unsee it. So now you're standing there, holding realization internally, while everybody else continues moving normally, laughing, talking, planning, pretending, and that creates pressure. Because awareness isolates people sometimes, not physically, psychologically. You begin carrying information emotionally that the room itself hasn't consciously accepted yet. And that's heavy, because awareness doesn't just reveal truth, it reveals responsibility. Now you have choices to make. Do you say something? Do you stay quiet? Do you intervene? Do you wait? Do you protect the relationship? Protect the person? Protect the atmosphere? Protect yourself? And suddenly, truth is no longer theoretical. It becomes relational, consequential, human. Because once awareness notices something real, you become responsible for how you carry it. And honestly, that responsibility exhausts a lot of people quietly. Because awareness is not just seeing clearly, it's living with what you see, without allowing it to destroy your peace, your relationships, or your humanity in the process. People often misunderstand silence. They assume silence means fear, weakness, uncertainty, passivity. Like if someone truly saw clearly, they would immediately speak, immediately confront, immediately expose, immediately force the truth into the room. But sometimes, silence means something entirely different. Sometimes silence means, I already understand the cost. Because once you become aware enough, you realize something uncomfortable. Truth does not enter rooms neutrally. Truth changes atmospheres. You know what happens when certain realizations become verbal? Defensiveness appears, embarrassment surfaces, denial activates, people withdraw emotionally, relationships strain, distance forms, not necessarily because truth is cruel, but because human beings protect identity before they protect reality. That's one of the hardest things aware people eventually learn. People do not only defend facts, they defend self-image, narratives, roles, emotional survival structures. So you've probably felt this moment before, that moment where you suddenly realized, if I say what I actually see right now, this entire atmosphere changes. And immediately, the situation becomes bigger than simply being honest. Now you're calculating impact, timing, emotional readiness, relational consequence. Can this person emotionally hold this truth yet? Would honesty create healing or simply detonation? Would this conversation create clarity or just emotional collapse? And that's exhausting, because now awareness becomes responsibility again. You're no longer just noticing reality. You're deciding how much reality the moment can safely carry. That's not cowardice. That's emotional intelligence under pressure, because immature awareness often weaponizes truth impulsively, but deeper awareness understands that truth delivered without timing can become destruction instead of transformation. And honestly, a lot of people listening right now have spent years carrying truth carefully, not because they lacked courage, but because they already understood how fragile human identity can be once contradiction enters the room. Not dangerous, just one of the hardest lessons aware people eventually learn is that truth and timing are not the same thing. Something can be completely true and still arrive destructively. That realization changes people deeply, especially emotionally honest people. Because when you value truth, part of you naturally thinks, if it's real, shouldn't it just be said? And logically, that sounds correct. But human beings are not machines. People do not process truth like data downloads. They receive reality through layers, through nervous systems, through emotional history, through fear, through attachment, through shame, through identity, through survival patterns, through readiness. And sometimes, forcing realization too early doesn't create growth at all. It creates resistance. You've probably experienced this before, trying to explain something you could already see clearly, only to watch the other person defend the illusion harder. Not because your perception was wrong, not because you imagined the contradiction. The nervous system simply could not safely hold the realization yet. That's an important distinction, because awareness eventually teaches you. People often reject truth, not because it's false, but because accepting it would emotionally reorganize their entire reality, and human beings resist fragmentation instinctively, especially when identity is attached to the illusion. So over time, this changes how you move through conversations. You become more careful, not fake careful. You stop treating honesty like a weapon to discharge impulsively. You start understanding that timing determines whether truth becomes clarity or collision, healing or humiliation, expansion or shutdown. That's why mature awareness often becomes quieter. Not because it stopped seeing clearly, because it learned that forcing realization can damage people emotionally before they're capable of integrating it. And honestly, that's difficult sometimes, because aware people often carry realizations internally long before the world around them is emotionally ready to hear them. So now you sit with things longer, observe longer, wait longer. Not every truth needs immediate release. Some truths require silence first, space first, safety first. Because sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is allow reality to arrive gently enough for the nervous system to survive meeting it. But silence has a cost too. People don't talk about that enough, because even when you choose restraint, even when you understand timing, even when you know speaking immediately would only create destruction, you still carry what you saw. And sometimes that weight follows you home. You leave the conversation, leave the building, leave the relationship, but internally, part of you is still inside the moment, replaying it. The pauses, the tone shifts, the emotional fractures underneath the words, the thing everybody felt but nobody named. And eventually, part of you starts wondering, should I have said something? Did I stay quiet too long? Would honesty have helped? But another part of you already understands why you didn't speak, because you saw the emotional cost too. You saw how fragile the atmosphere was. You saw how defensive people already were. You saw how quickly truth would have turned into conflict, shut down, or denial, and holding that tension repeatedly becomes exhausting. Especially when you keep witnessing the same patterns over and over. People betraying themselves slowly, people emotionally collapsing while insisting they're fine. Manipulation disguised as love, relationships eroding quietly, people lying to themselves while unconsciously asking everybody around them to participate in the illusion too. And sometimes, the hardest part is this. You carry realizations alone, not because nobody else could theoretically see them, because many people do not want to. Because seeing clearly often requires emotional change, and emotional change threatens identity. So the illusion survives, and aware people feel that pressure deeply, especially people whose nervous systems absorb atmosphere naturally, because you don't just experience moments intellectually, you feel them physically. Some conversations stay in your chest for hours afterwards. Some tensions linger in your breathing. Some atmospheres follow you home like emotional static. And over time, that accumulation becomes heavy. Not because awareness is wrong, but because carrying unspoken truth without proper release can quietly exhaust the nervous system. That's why restoration matters so much. Because aware people must eventually learn the difference between holding truth responsibly and drowning underneath everything they notice. You know what's interesting? Truth usually enters a room before language does. Long before anyone says, "We need to talk." Long before the confession, the argument, the breakup, the collapse, the atmosphere shifts first. A strange pause appears. Laughter starts sounding thinner. Silences stretch a little too long. Eye contact changes. Someone suddenly becomes harder to read. A room that once felt light starts feeling emotionally crowded. And most people either miss it completely or unconsciously avoid noticing it. But awareness catches it immediately. Because awareness doesn't just listen to words, it listens to emotional movement. The nervous system notices shifts before the conscious mind creates explanation for them. You can often feel when someone is hiding something, when resentment is quietly building, when somebody emotionally checked out weeks ago but hasn't verbally admitted it yet, when a relationship is beginning to fracture underneath polite conversation, when a person's smiles stop matching their spirit, and that becomes exhausting sometimes. Because now you're sitting in environments where two realities exist simultaneously, the spoken reality and the emotional reality underneath it, and your nervous system keeps tracking both. That's why certain rooms feel draining before anything bad even happens, because your awareness is constantly processing the unspoken layer beneath the performance, the hidden tension, the emotional editing, the instability people are trying to smooth over socially. And eventually, pretending peace starts feeling louder than honesty would have been. That's the irony most people miss. People often avoid truth to preserve harmony, while slowly creating deeper instability underneath. Because unresolved tension doesn't disappear, it accumulates. And aware people feel that accumulation early, sometimes painfully early. That's why your body reacts before the event fully unfolds. Because part of you already detected the shift in the field. And when you carry awareness like that, your nervous system often lives between two timelines at once. What the room is pretending to be, and what the room is slowly becoming underneath it all. Some people misunderstand peace completely. They think peace means no disagreement, no discomfort, no difficult conversations, no tension, just smooth surfaces, polite smiles, controlled atmospheres, everybody acting okay. But that's not peace, that's suppression with good lighting. Real peace can survive honesty. Real peace does not collapse the moment truth enters the room. False peace does, because false peace depends entirely on avoidance. Avoiding conflict, avoiding emotion, avoiding contradiction, avoiding the reality everybody can already feel underneath the surface. You've probably experienced this before. Sitting in a room where everybody acted fine, while your entire nervous system knew something underneath was collapsing. A relationship unraveling quietly. A resentment nobody addressed, a tension everybody felt but nobody acknowledged. And maybe the hardest part is this: the room silently expects your participation. Smile, nod, play along, keep the atmosphere comfortable, don't disturb the illusion. And aware people feel that pressure deeply, because your nervous system is being asked to cooperate with something it already knows isn't coherent. That becomes exhausting over time, not because you're difficult, because awareness hears mismatch. You hear the difference between calm and suppression, between peace and emotional avoidance, between connection and performance disguised as connection. And eventually, maintaining false harmony starts feeling heavier than addressing the truth itself. That's the irony. People often avoid honest conversations because they fear discomfort, but unresolved tension creates a deeper discomfort that slowly poisons the atmosphere anyway. Aware people feel that poison early. That's why certain environments leave you emotionally drained even when nothing happened, because your system spent hours carrying the weight of what nobody was willing to say out loud. And honestly, that's one of the loneliest feelings in the world, being surrounded by people who all feel the fracture, while silently agreeing to protect the performance instead. There's another side to all of this too. Some people learned very early that honesty created danger, so silence became survival, not metaphorically, physiologically. Maybe speaking truth created punishment. Maybe vulnerability created humiliation. Maybe asking questions created conflict. Maybe expressing pain created rejection. Maybe emotions themselves felt unsafe in the environments they grew up in. So the nervous system adapted. Stay agreeable, stay careful, stay emotionally edited. Read the room constantly. Don't upset the atmosphere. Don't create tension. Don't become too much. And over time, those adaptations become automatic. People stop expressing themselves honestly, not because they lack truth, but because their body associates authenticity with emotional risk. That's deeper than personality, deeper than introversion, deeper than social preference. That's conditioning. The nervous system learning. Certain versions of me are safer than others. And honestly, a lot of adults walking around today are not fully expressing themselves. They're emotionally negotiated versions of who they learned was safest to be. That realization changes how you see people, because suddenly you start recognizing how much communication is actually self-protection. People speaking carefully instead of truthfully. People managing reactions instead of expressing reality. People testing emotional safety before revealing sincerity, and aware people notice that difference instantly. Not because they're hypercritical, because the nervous system hears tension beneath language. It notices when words are edited before they leave the mouth. It notices when somebody is protecting an image, avoiding conflict, or emotionally shrinking themselves to maintain acceptance. And maybe the saddest part is this. Many people became so practiced at self-editing, they no longer know what fully honest expression even feels like anymore. Their survival personality became their identity. And if you've spent your life sensing those invisible negotiations inside conversations, of course, certain environments feel exhausting to you, because your awareness is constantly listening to what people wanted to say, what they were afraid to say, and the emotional distance between the two. But something important has to be understood here. Silence and suppression are not the same thing. A lot of people confuse them. Suppression is fear controlling truth. Suppression is abandoning honesty because the nervous system feels trapped, unsafe, or powerless. Suppression suffocates people internally, but conscious silence? That's something different entirely. That's discernment. One comes from powerlessness, the other comes from precision. That distinction matters, because aware people eventually realize not every truth must be spoken immediately to remain true. Sometimes the wisest thing you can do is wait, not forever, not avoidantly, not to protect illusion permanently, intentionally. Because some truths do not need force, they need conditions, a calmer moment, a safer environment, a nervous system that isn't already overloaded, a softer delivery, a relationship strong enough to survive honesty, a person finally becoming ready to hear themselves clearly and honestly. A lot of people confuse urgency with wisdom. They think awareness means say everything immediately. But mature awareness understands something deeper. Timing changes reception, delivery changes impact, emotional safety changes integration. A truth delivered carelessly can create shutdown instead of transformation. That's why deeper awareness often becomes quieter, slower, more intentional. Not because it stopped seeing clearly, because it learned that forcing realization can become another form of violence when the nervous system cannot safely absorb it yet. And once you truly understand that, your relationship with silence changes completely. Silence stops meaning, I'm afraid. Sometimes silence means, I'm waiting for coherence. I'm protecting the possibility of understanding. I refuse to turn truth into emotional shrapnel. And aware people eventually learn one of the hardest lessons of all. Not every realization belongs to the moment you first received it in. Some truths need time to become survivable. Some truths need space before language, and some truths arrive quietly enough that forcing them too early would only bury them deeper inside resistance. But you've probably experienced the opposite too. Moments where someone finally looked at you. Weeks later, months later, sometimes years later, and quietly said, "I think you were right." And those moments feel strange, not triumphant, not satisfying in the way people imagine, almost sad sometimes. Because aware people usually aren't trying to win. They're not collecting victories. They're trying to reduce distortion, trying to prevent unnecessary pain, trying to name what reality was already becoming underneath the surface. And honestly, there were probably times you stayed quiet because deep down you already knew something important. Reality itself was eventually going to reveal the truth. Patterns repeat, consequences surface, false structures crack over time. People can avoid awareness temporarily, but unresolved reality eventually introduces itself anyway. And mature awareness begins understanding this deeply. Some lessons cannot be taught verbally. Some realizations must be emotionally lived through. People often have to arrive at truth themselves before they can genuinely hold it. That realization changes how you move through life. You stop trying to force awakenings. You stop trying to drag people toward realizations their nervous systems are resisting. You stop believing every truth requires immediate confrontation, because eventually you understand life teaches too. Patterns teach, consequences teach, silence teaches, distance teaches, reality has its own timing. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply remain coherent while reality unfolds naturally. Not passive, not indifferent, grounded, because forcing awareness rarely creates transformation. But allowing people space to genuinely see for themselves, that creates something deeper, integration. And honestly, that realization matures people profoundly. You become less reactive, less desperate to be understood immediately, less emotionally entangled in whether others get it right now. Because part of you finally understands. Truth does not become more true because people accept it faster. And awareness is not proven through confrontation alone. Sometimes awareness looks like restraint. Sometimes wisdom looks like patience. Sometimes growth looks like trusting reality to reveal itself without needing to force every door open personally. That is maturity under awareness. But here's something else. Aware people eventually have to learn. You cannot emotionally carry every truth you notice if you try. You will crush your nervous system slowly. Because some of you became emotionally responsible for entire atmospheres. You walk into rooms and immediately begin scanning. Who's upset? Who's pretending? Who's withdrawing emotionally? Who's close to breaking? Who's hiding pain? Who's managing tension? And after a while, that level of awareness becomes exhausting. Because your nervous system never fully powers down. You track emotional movement constantly. You anticipate collapse early. You monitor tone shifts automatically. You try to stabilize rooms internally before conflict even happens, and eventually, your body forgets how to rest. That's what happens when awareness develops without boundaries attached to it. Awareness without boundaries becomes overload. And a lot of deeply aware people quietly live inside that overload every day, feeling everything, absorbing everything, carrying emotional weather that was never theirs to carry alone. But something important has to be understood here. Awareness does not require self-destruction. You are allowed to notice without fixing, to understand without absorbing, to witness without carrying, to care deeply without emotionally collapsing under the weight of every atmosphere you enter. That distinction matters profoundly because some truths belong to your awareness, but not your ownership. Just because you notice pain does not mean you were assigned responsibility for saving everyone from it. Just because you sense tension does not mean your nervous system must become the container for the entire room. And honestly, learning that distinction might save your life emotionally, because aware people often become exhausted not from seeing clearly, but from unconsciously trying to carry every emotional reality they encounter. And eventually, maturity teaches something gentler. You can remain compassionate without becoming consumed. You can remain aware without abandoning yourself. You can care deeply while still protecting your own coherence, because even people who hear the world clearly still deserve peace inside themselves too. Let me ask you something, gently. Where in your life have you been carrying truth silently? Not out of weakness, but because you understood the weight of saying it aloud. And deeper than that, have you confused discernment with cowardice? Because not every quiet person is afraid. Some are simply aware of consequence. If you've ever felt exhausted from carrying realizations silently, if you've ever watched people walk toward outcomes you already sensed coming, if you've ever sat in conversations holding awareness internally while everyone else continued moving normally, if you've ever stayed quiet because you understood that honesty in that moment would change everything, there's nothing wrong with you. Awareness naturally creates restraint, especially mature awareness, because once you truly understand how deeply words affect people, you stop throwing truth around carelessly. You begin respecting things many people overlook completely: timing, nervous systems, emotional readiness, identity structures, the fragility of self-image, the weight of consequence. You begin realizing that truth is not just intellectual, it's biological, relational, psychological, human. A sentence can reorganize someone's entire emotional world. A realization can collapse years of denial instantly. And once you understand that deeply, your relationship with honesty changes. Not because you became dishonest, because you became careful, conscious, intentional. That's not weakness, that's evolved awareness. Immature awareness often feels urgency. Mature awareness understands stewardship, and maybe your silence was never proof that you lacked courage. Maybe it was proof that you understood impact. Maybe part of you already knew. Truth is not only about accuracy, it's also about responsibility, about how something is carried when it's spoken, whether it creates clarity or simply emotional shrapnel. And that realization changes people profoundly. You stop reacting to every contradiction instantly. You stop trying to force awakenings. You stop needing immediate validation for what you perceive, because awareness matures beyond reaction. It becomes steadier, more grounded, more compassionate, not softer toward illusion, just wiser about how reality enters human beings safely. That's the shift, that's the movement, that's what happens when awareness stops trying to dominate rooms and starts learning how to move through them without losing coherence. That is the reason, not journey. Take a breath. Let the tension leave your chest for a second. If you've been carrying truth silently lately, don't mistake restraint for weakness. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is recognize a truth without forcing it into a space that cannot hold it yet. Dedicated to those who learned awareness is more than perception. It's discernment. The ones learning that clarity alone doesn't automatically create healing, that timing matters, delivery matters, readiness matters, and that some truths open doors, while others only create wounds when spoken without wisdom. If this episode resonated with you, subscribe and stay with us each week. Share it with someone who's been carrying more internally than they ever say out loud. And if you want to continue the conversation, you can find us on Facebook too. Not for noise, not for attention, just to keep the signal moving for the people still trying to navigate awareness without losing themselves inside it. Next time, we step into something even more difficult, the discipline of not correcting people. Not because you can't see the contradiction, but because you've learned not every misunderstanding belongs to your hands. Every day is awesome. We just have to get through it. I'll see you in episode 19.